Hello, everybody. This is, my first ever launch of a webinar, so you'll have to forgive any, bumbles and things that go along the way. I'm used to looking at an audience of people and getting their, feedback that way, and answering questions on the spot is kind of something that I really thrive on. So on the screen, you'll see my home email. That's the email that I use primarily when I do a public speaking engagement and answer back those questions that come up, or be able to give you a more in-depth answer through using that email. I am Diane Nackers. I'm a licensed and state and board certified speech and language pathologist. I have been working in the public schools for the past 14 years, and currently I have 17 kids on my caseload, varying from nonverbal to hyperverbal and more brilliant than I will ever be. And I will get started. Typically, this presentation is anywhere from 2 to 3 hours long, and none of us want to sit that long. So I will not be reading the slides word for word. I will be sending these slides along to you via that email. So just so we're all on a level playing field, I'm going to start with the bare bone basics and what is autism. It's a lifelong neurological developmental disability that changes over time, and that's the definition of developmental. The kids that I have seen that were diagnosed at 2 and 3 now are graduating from high school, and one just went off to Michigan Tech. So the early intervention things really move the progress along quicker. In Wisconsin, I put up our numbers for Wisconsin, and nationally the CDC has it 1 in 68. Wisconsin is 1 in 65 boys identified. And I did look up, when Rachel said Michigan, I did look up Michigan's, and Michigan's latest data is 1 in 68 boys, and very close to the 1 in 300 girls. The link is there for the fact sheet on how they do it, how they do their survey. I still have, some questions about the actual how they do their survey, because they basically look at 8-year-olds, and if you are a parent who has taken a child into the doctor and said that you had any concerns about autism at any point, then that's how they generate that number. It's not like actual diagnosed incidence of autism. So, that's a little concerning that the number is that high or that low, that 1 in 68 kids. There's no medical blood test. There is some amazing neurological brain studies that are happening in California that are proving to be very, very accurate in that early diagnosis stage. Some myths, we've all heard the myths, that it's bad parenting and refrigerator moms, and that, the people with autism have no sense of humor, they lack empathy or feelings. I'll explain some of these on how really what's happening neurologically when we get into the sensory system and the way that their brain is wired differently than ours. And some facts: individuals with autism spectrum are not defined by their diagnosis. I know many adults through the Autism Society. We have support groups, and we have young adults in that 20 to 35-year-old range that come to a monthly social gathering, and they're not defined by limitations or anything. So they keep their expectations high, and so should we. Vaccines, oh man, that was such a big bugaboo that it caused a whole lot of medical and health issues. And I think that the Journal of Pediatrics finally has enough evidence that they felt that they could put position statements out being very definitive that vaccines do not cause autism. On Good Morning America yesterday, they had mothers, a new study is coming out from Britain, I think, and they said that mothers taking antidepressants may have a very minimal, small link because it is a neurological based disorder. But they have ruled out the MMR shot, that there is no evidence that being vaccinated causes autism. So how is it diagnosed? How is it diagnosed? Well, this is tricky because a lot of it is interview, observation. Like we said, there's no medical test. So this is just a listing of various rating scales, interview and observation forms that are used by medical professionals when they are considering if the child has an autism spectrum disorder or something else. Autism is considered a very highly comorbid condition. 80% of kids and adults with autism have some other existing condition, whether it's OCD, ADHD, bipolar, because it is 100% neurological based. Who can diagnose autism? Well, we all might see it, you know, and we might see some of the characteristics, and we might have known, you know, a kid or 20 that have autism, but that's about it. We know one child with autism. It doesn't mean that, you know, the next little Billy's going to have the same kind of autism. I can line up the 17 kids that I have on my caseload right now, and not one single child has the same manifestation of the autism. And that's by and large due to genetics. You know, they've got their mom and dad's DNA, and they don't have, you know, Billy's DNA is not Ben's DNA. So comparing kids with autism should only be done by a medical professional. And these are the people that are licensed and legally able to diagnose autism and tell the parents that that's what the child has. Pediatric neurologists, psychologists, sociologists, developmental pediatricians. And then many clinics have speech therapists, OTs, PTs, and social workers as part of the team. And the social worker link is very key because they are the ones that can pull in those additional resources later on. These are just, oh, I mentioned this, these are some of those comorbid conditions. Lots and lots of sleep disturbances because their bodies just don't know when to shut it down and relax. Challenging behaviors, I'll get into that a little bit later in the slides, because that's pretty much what we see are the challenging behaviors and what can we do to help that. Sometimes what we think we're doing to help really isn't helping that much. There are different educational determination versus a medical diagnosis. And the DPI has set very clear, specific criteria in order to become educationally identified as a child with autism. And the medical field also has very strict criteria. And in order to qualify medically, in the square on the bottom, there are different criteria, and I'll explain what these are in the next couple slides. But in order to be qualified as medically, or child with a medical diagnosis of autism, they would need to meet 6 out of 12 of the criteria in the box. And the school criteria, that parent can come in with a 3-inch thick binder of medical evidence and testing and everything. But if those symptoms and signs are not negatively impacting them educationally, the school kind of has to come up with a different plan, and vice versa. If the school determines the child has an educational need for services and supports. That does not mean that they would meet the medical criteria for autism spectrum disorder. This PDD-NOS that is down in the corner means pervasive developmental delay, not otherwise specific. And do you see they only need 4 out of 5? It's a real, like, almost wastebasket where, yeah, they've got some social issues and yeah, they've got a couple behavioral concerns that are, you know, impacting. So, but they really, not otherwise specific, they really can't put their thumb on exactly what's happening. So this is the range, and the range is very, very wide. It goes from the extremely above high IQ, 100, the little guy that I have in 2nd grade going into 3rd, he's got 168 IQ that they measured at Freighter because Children's Hospital didn't have an IQ measure that went that high. So parents just investigated and took him to Freighter, and it came out 168. Yet the little guy cannot interact in the classroom appropriately. He has a very hard time understanding the social rules in school, why he needs to be there. 2 weeks into the school, he was laying his head on his desk, seemingly falling asleep. And then when I approached him and talked to him about this, his response back was a very straight-faced, "I'm waiting for the teacher to teach me something interesting." And it's that lack of social understanding that the first 2 weeks of school is typically review, and they'll teach you the new things that you need to know when all the routines are learned for the new school year, and getting to know the new teacher, and she's getting to know you. Some of those things go right over his head. But if you put a trigonometry book in front of him, he would have read it easily within about 4 hours, and then been able to tell you back exactly what was on page 34. He's pretty fascinating. And then I also work with kids on the classic autism side of the spectrum. Those are the typical, or what we envision as autism. Nonverbal, seemingly lower IQ, although I tell you, I have one friend who's in 4th grade and he's nonverbal. He can read, he can comprehend, he just can't talk. He's been given a computer to talk for him, and he comes up with some pretty amazing things that, you know, his whole last 2 years of school have been teaching him keyboarding so that he can get those thoughts out in a way that is not destructive or a behavior. So what we see with classic autism, you know, as adults are that repetitive rocking behavior, the self-stim type of behavior, very, very much introverted and needing a lot of professional and family adult guided support. Early identification with everything is key. Sarah Webb, she wrote a fascinating article about early intervention by 1 year old. And that goes into the research that Dr. Eric Courchain is doing with his wife in San Diego, California. She's a developmental pediatrician and he is a neurologist. And the two of them have teamed up and created a very amazing, very strict protocol for San Diego County infants and families, and it's proving to be a model for other clinics to take on. So that's always interesting, watching their take on early intervention. But watching this head circumference growth size is something that's pretty amazing. When they're looking at the neurological scans of newborns and they're looking at the frontal lobe, they see an explosive neuron and dendrite growth in the frontal lobes of kids that then by 2 and 3 years old end up having, you know, to be diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder, and they're still trying to, determine what's the actual trigger, what makes that growth happen. And then adults, right now the adults are kind of in limbo. When they were in school, and I'm older, I graduated in 1983. I know that we had one student who spent pretty much of his education, he was moderately verbal, but he spent a great deal of time in the back seat in his classroom, in our classroom, doing the typical rocking, not a behavior problem. He would just get up every once in a while and wander around the back of the classroom, answer questions very bluntly and pointedly when asked. Looking back now, should he have had some special education supports? Probably. Is he now an adult functioning with autism? Minimally. He's living still with his mom and dad, and I'm sure that the family has some life plans for him set up. But adults are a little bit different that have not been diagnosed. And I put in a chart of their strengths and their challenges. Very, very focused on detail, direct communication. Oh my goodness, they're very verbal, they're very loyal. They want to get out every single fact that they know about a certain topic. And sometimes trying to break into that can cause some communication difficulties. They have a very hard time seeing the big picture. Unemployment in adults with autism is beyond comparison. The last teen group study that was done, they said 94% of teens that are eligible to be in the workforce. So they counted those kids as 16 to 24. That's a high number of teens that are just not out there. Social issues are the primary, not being able to see the big picture, and even giving them structured, scripted, positions like at McDonald's, this is the job that you have, this is what you do, or trying to branch them out into other kind of employment settings is sometimes very, very difficult. I know the Department of Vocational Rehab Services is trying their best, and they have a very good social skills training program that they're trying to implement everywhere so that basic job skills are explicitly taught. Their job shadowing, their job mentoring, all of those things, are vital in order for a young adult on the spectrum to maintain and stay on their job. So what we see in autism, there's the typical model of the iceberg. We see the typical 10%. We see the behaviors that happen. And we have to understand what's all layering on underneath those behaviors. Rachel, do you think this is a good time for one of the poll questions?
Sure. You want to do the first one?
Sure.
All right, so I'm going to launch the poll. Give me just a second. So you guys, for this one, you can select multiple age groups if you work with more than one of these age ranges. And unfortunately, you can't see it, Diane. So if everybody wants to take a second and vote, we'll leave it up for another 15, 20 seconds. And give Diane kind of an idea of what the populations you're all working with.
Because that will help me determine how in-depth I go to in the next few slides.
All right, 5 more seconds. Get it in there if you want to vote. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and share it out, and I'll read it to you, Diane, because again, for some reason, you can't see it. So it looks like about 14% of our attendees said that they work with the 0 to 5 population, 22% for each, the 5 to 10 and the 10 to 18-year-olds, and then 92% with adults, which is not really surprising for our programming. So,
how many for the adults?
92% work with adults.
Wow. Okay, well then those slides that I have coming up for adults that'll be great. So we have all of these things under the characteristics of autism. We have learning and thinking and processing differences. Right there, that can, prove job success or failure right there. The social differences, communication, sensory processing differences, and then those repetitive patterns of behavior, actions, and interests. Sometimes having those patterns of behavior and specific interests are a way for us, if we get creative, to find a job that suits those adults on the spectrum, like computers and technology and those kind of things. But in the thinking and processing differences, they're very, very concrete and literal. My second grade friend, well, if she's not going to teach me, I'm going to lay here with my head on the desk. Very black and white. As soon as there's something interesting, I'll wake up and I'll tune in. I had a teen stopped on the highway for speeding, and he chose to argue, which is not a good thing, but he felt that he had enough evidence that he could be very, very direct with this officer who was stopping him for speeding. It turned out okay. I got a call and then had to do some training for the police officers and the first responders, which was a good thing, because it could have ended up very badly. But in the end, the young man had a life lesson learned that you don't question the make and model of the radar gun. You don't question, some of those things from authority. So that very concrete, we have to learn how, and I'm like the most sarcastic person on the planet, and it's really a switch that we have to learn how to turn off, like even just answering a question or a statement back, that we might think to not be quite true, and say, really? Yeah, that's true. Executive functioning, and that's all that frontal lobe stuff that happens. Attending, problem solving, organizing, prioritizing. Boy, if they see, what's happening with the teens on the job, if they see or feel that one part of their job is more important than the other, that's where that prioritizing and needing things spelled out and trained, and sometimes that letting it go just doesn't happen. Not understanding the connection, and this is so big for the little ones, and this is so big for those teenagers who are trying to experiment, but they don't understand often the connection between what they did and the resulting consequences. So with the little ones, we've learned very, very quickly and a long time ago that using things like timeouts works for the typical child. They have time to sit and think, but it can be something as simple as switching the wording around. Oh, you threw that toy, your body's not safe, you need to go to the safe spot, and giving them, like when I do a public talk or go to a daycare association, I bring along carpet squares with red duct tape hearts on them, and that's their new safe spot. We all know it's technically a timeout, but time they don't understand what time means, and then out, they think that they have to leave the room. Then when they're put in a timeout, they get up and they leave. Well, then they're in, it's this vicious cycle. They're just in more trouble for getting up. But if you say you need to go to the safe spot and think, boom, or use a thinking spot, just switching up the vocabulary sometimes works a lot better than sending them to a timeout. They have difficulty applying that new skill in new areas. That's why job coaching is so vital, that it's actually on that job. So SOAR used to be ARC up here in the Valley, and now they have a program for training technical aspects like rebooting phones and cleaning out computers and things like that, but this is an actual job skill. They're teaching it at Goodwill Industries and at the SOAR facilities, but then they're actually finding places at like Myron Construction and other places for them to do these tasks physically on site, because that transfer and carryover doesn't always happen. And then difficulty, that's, you know, shifting their attention. Well, no, I'm doing this right now. I have to go and, you know, until they see that that is a complete beginning, middle, and end, they have a hard time switching their attention. Social participation differences. In the corner, I have a picture of my teen group. We went to a wonderful outing at Boardlandia, and watching this little group of guys, there is one who is extremely shy. We've been together as a teen group for meeting monthly for 7 years, and he is now able to like spontaneously greet the other guys. It's taken a long time. So they go all the way to dominance. There's the little guy in the gray. He would talk nonstop 24/7 if he was, you know, if that's the social expectation. But it's not when you're actually participating in playing a game. So we have to, you know, work very hard to teach him that. Confusion, uncertainty about new environments. This is profound. So even working, you know, at a job, like one of the guys works at McDonald's, and he was moved from the Kimberly McDonald's to the Appleton McDonald's, and that really threw him for a loop for about a month, because the layout was different, the personnel was different, the job expectations, the tone of voice used talking with workers was different. So it was always, when I started this teen group for the Autism Society, it was my mission to get them out into a wide variety of settings, just to expose them to new things. The reduced social interactions, many of these kids, when we started the group, and even the new ones that join us, they're pretty much dragged there by their parents. It's very difficult for them to see that this is a good thing for them when they're comfortable being in their own situation, in their own setting. Sometimes, and most often, they're very naive and super trusting, and they delight in the smallest things. At this Boardlandia place, they have buckets, bins and buckets of different kinds of dice. And of the 20 that went to this outing, there was only 4 that didn't spend a considerable amount of time just fascinated by the shapes and size and colors and stuff of the dice. And these are all guys who are very verbal. They're all primarily mainstreamed in their high schools and doing very well, but there's even, you know, that pull back to something that fascinates them is always there. Communication differences, like my friend Isaac, who is nonverbal, all the way, you know, to Joey, who is so hyperverbal. They can put you under the carpet with what they know. They struggle with the nonverbal communication. We work very hard at the elementary and middle and high school level to teach them all the body language differences that, you know, that show up. And it's very fun to show like very small clips of commercials and things, and with our tablets and our phones, even stopping after a 5-second, well, how did they feel? What did they think? What was happening? And getting them to guess if the body language matched, or even just role-playing games, and starting at that little age of showing them, you know, if you're mad but acting happy, or or vice versa. Can they predict what the emotion is that you're doing that, what you're expressing? Demonstrate emotional outbursts. So you'll see the blow up before you'll understand the feeling that was actually driving it. And that's typically what we see. I helped out a mom in Shopko last school year. Boy, it was obvious her child was having nothing of getting new shoes for school. It apparently was okay with him that his toes were sticking completely out the end of his tennies. And what everyone in the store saw was the emotional outburst. What they didn't see was his autism was kicked into high gear on top of sensory issues. these new shoes did not feel good. He couldn't see his socks. And I just wrote on a Post-it note, you know, I'm a speech therapist. I understand what's happening. You know, do you need any support? And she gave me the Post-it note back and said, yes, get him in new shoes. And so I did. I turned it over to him. I said, which ones do you like? And went with one half size bigger than he wore. And he left there with 2 pairs of new shoes. It was pretty neat. Difficulty following multiple instructions. This one is going to be a universal from 0 to 99 years old. If multiple tasks need to be done or talked about, breaking them down into 1 or 2 direction units. So we need to do the dishes. Well, that's huge. And right there you can get anywhere from refusal to shut down to ignoring you to a full-blown tantrum. Can you put your plate in the sink? Yeah, I can do that. Can you carry your glass to the counter? Yeah, I can do that. Breaking things down into small units still gets it done with a lot less drama. Tips for communicating with adults, whether they know or don't know that they have autism. Use their name in conversation. I see this all the time. Hey guys, come over here. Or, you know, let's all watch a movie. Or what do you guys think about this? Well, they're not a guy, especially if they're a girl. You know, Lisa, do you want to watch, you know, a movie? Sure. Ted, are you going to come over here and eat some lunch? Sure. Guys, it's time for lunch. And you might get 1 or 2 that are actually like really hungry to come over to you. Make sure you have their full attention if they have been reading the paper or watching the news. You know, again, use their name and, you know, address it clearly. Stick to a specific topic. This is super hard because a lot of times they circumlocate. They'll talk all around, you know, what's happening just as a way of connecting and communicating and downloading everything they know about fly fishing or their latest video game. And so sticking to a topic. And sometimes I teach this just with same color construction paper squares. And I'll have, you know, like 3 different colors out. And if the topic switches, I'll just touch a different color. And that's their cue that they left the topic that you're talking about. That works really good starting at about 6 or 7 when you're trying to teach those communication and conversation skills. And I ask you a question, you answer, you can ask me a question back, but stay on the topic. It's really important. I put a website link at the bottom, and man, it was full of great things. Like, I did not know this, you know, don't use terms of endearment, sweetie, honey, dear. I know this, use their name, but you know, I didn't know that this threw them off so much. And it's all because of their social perspective. For adults, if you're calling someone sweetie or dear, well, they have a rule in their head. Oh, that's safe for somebody who I love or who loves me. Oh, now you're my worker and you're calling me dear. Oh, that must mean you love me. So you could set yourself up for some difficult moments. Tips for talking with kids: make it visual as possible, and I've got some slides coming up to show you what I mean. Less talk and more pictures. Super hard for me as a speech therapist not to talk so much. Slow the pace of conversation. On average, it takes 15 to 45 seconds for them to respond back. So when you're asking them at lunch, do you want more milk? And they're thinking about it, and you pour them some before they answered, but they really didn't want more, you're going to have an issue. Or you skip them and go on to the next child or the next teen or the next adult, and you didn't give them that response time. And that's totally because of the processing differences that they have. Here's just some examples of communication things. Very clear: stop, don't touch, clean up. A help sign. This is an example of the visual schedule, so they know what's happening. There's a do and a done side. More ways to make their life visual. Edit their own choices. When they're older, they can put in the things that they have to get done. Giving them choices, you know, young or old, you know, they want, and then have a choice board of their preferences. The behavioral repertoire, we've touched on that quite a bit. Anxiety drives probably 80% of their behavior. Anxiety is very hard to predict. We don't know what they're thinking about in their head. That is going to cause them some difficulties with behaviors. So when we do get to know them, we have to avoid those triggers as much as possible. Challenging behaviors and teaching them through social stories. Even adults, this one, I put some examples in here, but social stories are meant to help the kids and adults understand exactly what's expected. I'm almost always, because I'm the speech therapist, I'm called to the classroom after an incident has happened, not as a, you know, because we don't always know what's going to happen. For a teen group, I do a social story before an event. So if you're going on an adult field trip, you can say, you know, we are going to be seeing, you know, all of these things. This is how we're expected to behave, you know, all those kind of things. But for kids, stuff happens in a blink of an eye. So I put in here an example of a story for running. I like to run. It's fun to go fast. You know, there's specific wording that you use, and you see how it's I, because it's the child that you're going to be reading this with, not the word you. It's they are going to internalize that I. Always highlight that they need to be safe, and the other word that needs to be included is I will try. None of us are perfect. None of the kids are perfect, or adults. And then putting in some feeling words. My teachers and parents like it when I remember to walk inside. So then I did one for pushing. I have two hands because pushing is a big deal. Pushing, hitting, those kind of things. I have two hands. I use my hands for holding my toys, eating, and playing. See, positive things that are supposed to happen with our hands. Sometimes I feel like pushing. My friends can get hurt if I push, so here's a consequence. And they like friends. They don't want to hurt their friends. When I feel like pushing, I will try to squeeze a fidget. So we're giving them a positive outlet for that need to push. Carrying something heavy or asking for a break. My friends like it when I use my hands to play. So giving them that back to, this is what our hands do, back to the social connection. And then I put in here from Carol Gray the components that are necessary in an effective social story. I don't want to run, because they don't understand. They hear the word run, and that's the immediate trigger that they have. Some things that you can put in place, whether group homes or centers or wherever, is something that we're constantly revising ours, but we call it the moving company. Anything that gives the kids, adults, purposeful movement for their sensory needs. Milk jugs with beans in, and they carry them from one end to the other. They, carry laundry. They, shake out rugs. They do anything functional with their bodies to switch off that need to push, hit, throw, run, just to get that physical release. These are some behavioral supports that are out there, called the zones of regulation. You can look that up. I just put it in there for reference. They are now tweaking movies into behavioral things. So that's kind of a good thing. And then giving them access to breaks when they need it and teaching them a structured break is always very, very helpful. So sensory processing. There's a video link down here. The video is of an 8-year-old explaining stimming. Stimming is that need to hum, cough, rock, flap, use their eyes differently than we do. Sometimes they just will push on the side of one eye to get a visual distortion. But sensory processing and communication are the two hallmarks for autism. And if their communication system is, cleared up where they've got some words and you can teach them the simple, forms of communication, keeping your speech slow and clear, less words, more visuals, then you look at the sensory processing. And they can be hyper, overly sensitive, or hypo, lack of. I did have a student that was so hyposensitive, she walked into a metal frame of a door and it didn't register at all that she had just broken her nose. But when she's on the carpet and sitting and paying attention to a group story, someone can literally just brush past her and she will start screaming as if she's on fire. So taking into account all of the sensory systems when you're trying to problem solve, a particular problem is a very good place to start. So you can look at the tactile system. That's the touch. Are they hyposensitive? These are the kids that like no tags and like their socks to be just right. They're the adults who wear the same clothes for 6 or 7 days in a row. And that's the perfect opportunity for a social story about cleanliness and hygiene and the importance of, showering and bathing and things like that. I was called to an agape group home because they were having all of these issues at showering time with a young man. And it ended up being they wanted him to shower. Well, that felt to him like they were taking razor blades and slashing him, is how he worded it. So he just started taking baths instead. So sometimes stepping back and being that other voice of reason, did you try, did you think of, might be the way to go. So vestibular, these are those, they don't know where their body is in space. So they'll, bounce off the walls, they'll fall off their chairs, there'll be a lot of leaning forward when they walk and they, have that unusual gait because they have a hard time, figuring out where their body is in space. So then you compare that, compound that with some visual issues. Vision is very, very tricky because it's hard to get a prescription accurate for people on the autism spectrum because the whole experience of going to the eye doctor and then the grilling on, is it, slide 1 or slide 2 or slide 3, it's so confusing. So going to the eye doctor is another perfect opportunity for a social story. Auditory, boy, is it too loud or is it too quiet? Auditory processing, this is where that delay, that profound delay comes in, of the 15 to 45 seconds, giving them time to respond. Smell. Third grader walked into the cafeteria. If they were having broccoli that day, he wouldn't get within 2 halls of the cafeteria. He could smell it from that far away. We just have to be very cognizant of when we're working with individuals on the spectrum that we're wearing low or no scent kinds of deodorants and perfumes and things like that, because what we might think smells good might give them a profound migraine. Taste, oh gosh, taste is hard. Many have a restrictive or restricted diet, or they like crunchy, salty, or bitter. So we have to, it's very, very hard to get through this. the gustatory system is very, very tricky. There's a lot of research coming out now on autism and their leaky gut and all of these kind of things that they're trying. And you can try it for a while, but there's no trial that has proven so far that the gluten-free and casein-free diet improves autism. It might help with some of the symptoms of their bellyache, but it doesn't take away their autism symptoms. And you know, I love the nutritionists. It's very controversial, this whole gluten-free, let's try it, versus casein-free. Very controversial. Tips for avoiding sensory overload. Let's talk more visuals, providing that safe space. Turning down lights. Fluorescent lights are a huge trigger for excessive vocalizations, excessive rocking in older adults. Their hearing is so sensitive that they can hear that flicker inside that bulb, and it's like an adult having tinnitus. You know, that constant hum is very, very troublesome. Being able to provide headphones and reducing the noise level, you know, definitely helps. Here's some links to some video clips. There is this one, the BBC and Rosie. She is now, I think, 17 or 18 years old in the video. She's 13, and she's amazing how she explains autism, and she interviews families and other kids who have autism. So I would highly recommend. That's 13 minutes that you will not regret watching. And then the 8-year-old on stimming is a 5 to 6 minute video. Highly recommend you watching that too, because he really does have a way of wording what stimming is and what it does for him and his body. Here are some additional references that you can look at. I put the links right to it. And then it's always hard. It's like, what do we do when we have these concerns with a child? You know, what should we say to the parents? How should we say it? And I guess from my perspective, I'm not even a doctor, I can't say it. I would just say these are the strategies that we're trying to support Billy and his behaviors. This is what we've tried. What do you have at home that works? What have you tried? Is it time to talk to the doctor about these behaviors? But be very clear about the behaviors, not that they are being naughty. They're just, these are behaviors that we have to figure out. And he's constantly dumping buckets of toys. Well, is that a visual thing? Is it a, he needs the heavy work? He needs structure. He needs a social story. He needs help picking up after the fact. You know, there's a lot that goes into that. And these agencies in Wisconsin, the Autism Society of Wisconsin, here's a link to their main page. There's a link to their resources. That also leads you to a link down in that Milwaukee, Madison area. Then the Department of Health and Safety for Children, their link has some amazing tips and tools, as does Easter Seals. And then, of course, we can always fall back on the DPI. If we're looking at the school age, high school, it might help guide that discussion that you have with the parents. So, Rachel, are there any questions, or should
we have any questions come in yet, so we could launch the last poll while people put questions in?
Okay.
All right, so if you have any questions for Diane, if you want to go ahead and put those into the chat box. We have one more poll just for Diane to get to know you all a little bit more. So I'm going to launch that. If you want to put your response in there, we'll leave that up for 30, 40 seconds. And then, like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to add those in the chat box so Diane can talk a little bit more about that for you or clear any of that up.
It's so hard doing this without the visuals and materials that I use. It's very different format.
It's a different experience without that nonverbal feedback from your audience.
It is.
All right, we'll leave that poll up for about 5 more seconds. Get those questions in. We've got a couple in. All right, so the response from our poll about what kind of the knowledge level of the audience is, 26% said they had none. 23% they had some personal experience, they either live or know someone who has autism. 29% said they had educated experience, formal coursework or seminars, and then 23% said they had both personal and educational experience.
Wow, what an awesome audience then.
Yeah, all right. So we have one question's come in. When was autism first recognized, and when was autism spectrum recognized?
Hans Asperger in the early 40s, he came out with Asperger's syndrome. And from there, well, before that, the kids were placed in institutions and they were called pediatric schizophrenic disorders. And I guess it's really shocking that it evolved so slowly, but then, you know, in the medical world so quickly. In 1980 is the first time that they recognized it in the school system. So in the schools previously, they would call the kids emotional behavior disabilities, and that's how they were treated. They were segregated and separated from the other kids. They were treated as if, you know, they had, you know, mental health concerns. Their education suffered because of it. Their social interactions suffered because of it. And even in, you know, my 14 going on 15 years in the public schools, watching the kids that we are able to take off of the emotional behavior disorder label and watch that morph into an autism spectrum, have them programmed differently, have them fully included in the classroom whenever and as much as possible, has, I think, generated the good outcomes that we're getting as far as IEP development and things like that. So that's a great question. But yeah, it was in the 40s. Before that, they were institutionalized, and there really wasn't an understanding that it was a neurological based disability.
Thanks. We've got a couple more questions. The next one is from a location that has a drop-in youth center, and they want to support a parent who has struggles with the child who's been asked to leave the public school and may not be able to go to private school. If we could direct the parent, where would you suggest directing them to?
They're not able to go back to public school. Well, wow. That's very, very serious. I would question the parent on, have they done, and these are big words, but this is where that DPI link will help that person who asked this question. It's something called a manifestation determination. And they will meet as a team and they will talk about programming and was the programming appropriate? You know, I don't, you know, not knowing, have they tried an offsite placement? Have they, you know, I don't know all the details from this question, but I would definitely direct her to the link in the PowerPoint for the DPI and have her look up with that parent or for that parent manifestation determination.
And they said they did direct them to DPI. So, and definitely making sure they have an advocate at those IEP meetings would be a good.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And going through their local CISA, the collaborative education system. I'm not sure which CISA they belong to, but that's a very good resource to help them determine which professionals should go to that IEP.
All right. Another question is from someone who works in human resources for us. They said, do you have any advice on helping an employee or a job candidate who discloses this type of diagnosis as they navigate our employment process and or function in their role?
Well, and disclosure is completely optional. And I don't know of an employer that can fire someone because they disclose that. It may be beneficial to say, I have an autism spectrum disorder. This is how it affects me with their employer, being more of a pro advocate after they have the job and say, so sometimes I need you to repeat the direction, but say it exactly how you said it. Sometimes writing me a list of tasks is better than telling me a list of things to do. So I think that it can be twofold. If they are a very good self-advocate, they can tell that employer exactly what they need. And maybe that's the way we need to go about training these young adults and adults in the workforce. It's tell the employer what they need and then meet them halfway on making that happen.
Excellent, thank you. The next question is, how early in life can Asperger's be seen?
So most often between 12 and 24 months. You'll have noticed subtle signs of almost deafness where they don't turn to their name. They have a hard time, generating that spontaneous giggle and laugh. Those are going to be kids that are typically more severe. Often high functioning autism in boys is typically about kindergarten, first, second grade. Girls, hands down, will be third to fourth grade, fifth grade for sure. When the social gap is hitting us educators in the face. But the little kids at 12 months, they'll be content to just sit and stay there and not, explore their environment. 18 months, they should be, off and crawling and jabbering, but they'll have that flat affect or that repetitive spinning of tires and hyper focus on one thing will really start being pronounced. Hard time drawing them out of a moment when they're, sitting in one of those hyper focused moments. When parents often go back, like as I always do, I'm on the front line. So I have, the early childhood, elementary and middle school. And when we're doing especially a very high functioning child in second or third grade, and I have a chance to sit back and do a parent interview in a developmental history, I'll say, do you have any videos of them? And then we can go back and go, oh, see that? But that was his favorite. And I'm looking at an 18-month-old who lines up all of his little cars and Legos and trucks and blocks and dolls and toys, but you can't touch them. And he lines them up exactly the same every single time he plays with them. So the subtle signs are there early on, but if they're high functioning, they're not going to show up until the social impact is more pronounced.
All right, last call for questions. We'll hang tight for a few seconds. If anyone has any last questions, feel free to pop those in quick so we don't miss you.
And like I said, I do respond very quickly to email now that, I'm on summer vacation for the next, oh my gosh, it's only 5 more weeks. But I know time went fast this year. I do respond very quickly if you've got a specific, situation or you want a little bit more in-depth. It's really hard because I can do 3 hours just on communication or just on sensory or just on behavior. So giving a broad view of everything is sometimes hard.
We had one more last quick question, and they're asking if you know of any individuals with autism who have gone on to college. And I think
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. Lots of them go on to college, and they go on to college without an IEP. You have to set them up for success and not let them take 15 or 18 credits, because usually, like UW-Fox is in our backyard, and I've done a lot of staff training there with their personnel that does scheduling, because these kids are so smart, these young adults are so smart, but then they don't understand. It's the first time ever they don't have somebody telling them, especially if they go away to college. Get up, get your breakfast, get to school. This is, those kind of things. And the parents or whoever can get them on very limited schedule, but then life happens. Your dorm roommate has somebody over all night long and you didn't get to sleep. There's a lot of social hidden curriculum kind of things that need to be taught very specifically for them to be successful. But yeah, many go on to college now. And I guess that's a good thing that I get called in, but sometimes I don't get called in until they're in like an academic situation where they've, not gone to class because they've done all the work for the semester, for the whole entire semester in the first 2 weeks. So they didn't think they had to go to class anymore. And, just those kind of typical autism quirks.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Diane, for your presentation and everyone for your participation and questions. Please be sure when you log off in just a minute, we are going to have that survey pop up. If you could please fill that out. If you don't get it to display, it will be in the follow-up email that gets automatically generated through the GoToWebinar software that we use, and you'll get that tomorrow or something. So thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you very much.